Once upon a time, there was a big, strong giant named Goliath. He was from a place called Gath, and he was really tall, like super tall, about 9 feet tall. Goliath was all geared up in armor and had a big brass helmet on his head. He was a champion warrior of the Philistines, who were enemies of the people of Israel. Now, on the other side, there was a young shepherd boy named David. He was just a regular kid, but he had a lot of courage and faith in God. One day, the armies of Israel and the Philistines were facing off in a valley called Elah. Goliath came out from the Philistine camp and challenged the Israelites. He dared anyone to come fight him one-on-one. Everyone in the Israelite army was scared because Goliath was so huge and strong. But David, who wasn't even a soldier, heard Goliath's challenge and decided to accept it. He believed that God would help him defeat the giant. So, with only a sling and a few stones, David faced Goliath. Goliath laughed at him, but David wasn't afraid. He swung his sling, aimed true, and hit Goliath right in the forehead with a stone. The giant fell down, and David ran up, took Goliath's own sword, and finished him off. That day, David showed everyone that even the smallest person can do big things with faith and bravery. It's a story about believing in yourself and trusting in God, no matter how big your challenges may seem. And that's why the story of David and Goliath has been loved and told for thousands of years. Leave your like and subscribe to our channel and stay up to date with all our videos. Sure, let me tell you more about what a champion was in those times. In ancient days, a champion of an army was like their superstar warrior. Imagine someone who was not just strong, but the strongest. They were chosen to represent their army in battles, kind of like a superhero for their side. This champion wasn't just tough. They were respected and admired for their bravery and skill in fighting. So, when Goliath stepped out as the champion of the Philistine army, it was a big deal. He was their best fighter, all decked out in heavy armor made of brass. His spear was as thick as a big tree branch, and his shield was so strong it protected him from all sides. When Saul, the king of Israel, faced the Philistines, Goliath stood out as their toughest challenge. Everyone was scared of him because he was so huge and fierce. But then, young David, who was just a shepherd boy, stepped up to fight Goliath. Even though he was much smaller and had no armor, David trusted in God and believed he could defeat the giant. And you know what? With a single stone from his sling, David knocked Goliath down. Then he used Goliath's own sword to finish the job. It was a huge victory for the Israelites, showing that bravery and faith can overcome any obstacle, no matter how big. So, champions like Goliath were more than just strong fighters. They were symbols of their army's strength and courage, and they played a big role in ancient battles. Leave your like and subscribe to our channel and stay up to date with all our videos. Let's break it down in a way that's easy to understand, especially for kids. Back in ancient times, armies didn't just fight as a big group. They sometimes picked their best fighter, called a champion, to represent them. This champion wasn't just strong. They were famous for their fighting skills and bravery. They were like the superhero of their army, inspiring everyone with their courage. The main job of a champion was to win battles for their side. They did this by defeating the other army's champion in a special fight called a duel. It was like a big showdown, where everyone watched to see who would win. These duels were super important because they decided big things like who would win a war, settle arguments, or even decide what happened to prisoners. Goliath was the champion of the Philistine army. He was a giant from a city called Gath, and people from there were called Gittites. Goliath was huge, over 9 feet tall. Just imagine someone that tall, towering over everyone else. He was so big that in 2009, a guy named Sultan Qasim was declared the tallest man in the world by Guinness World Records, and he was about the same height as Goliath. So, Goliath wasn't just big. He was a symbol of strength and power for the Philistines. But then along came David, a young shepherd boy who believed in God and wasn't afraid to face Goliath. With just a sling and a stone, David showed that even the biggest challenges can be overcome with courage and faith. His victory is still remembered today as a story of bravery and standing up to bullies. Sure, let's make this exciting and easy to understand. Imagine a guy named Goliath, who was not just big but absolutely huge, over 9 feet tall. To give you an idea, that's taller than the current tallest man in the world, who's about 8 feet 3 inches tall. Goliath was like a giant among men. Now, Goliath wasn't just tall. He was a fierce warrior. He wore this super strong armor made of bronze. It covered him head to toe, weighing about as much as 2 big suitcases put together. Imagine trying to move with that much metal on you. His legs were covered, he had a big helmet on his head, and even his spear was like a tree trunk. It was so heavy. On top of all that, he had a buddy who walked in front of him with a huge shield, ready to block any arrows or attacks that came his way. It was like having an extra layer of protection. So, when Goliath stepped onto the battlefield, he looked like he was invincible. No one could touch him. He was a scary sight for anyone facing him in a fight. But then, along came a brave young shepherd named David. He didn't have any armor or fancy weapons. All he had was a slingshot and some stones. And you know what? With one shot, David brought down Goliath. It was amazing. David showed everyone that courage and clever thinking can beat even the scariest giants. And that's why people still talk about David and Goliath today. It's a story about bravery, believing in yourself, and using your strengths, no matter how small, to do big things. All right, let's make this story come to life. Imagine this giant guy named Goliath. He was so big and strong that just looking at him made everyone scared. He wore this super tough armor made of bronze, like a human tank. It covered him from head to toe, and even his spear was as thick as a big tree branch. He had a friend who carried a huge shield in front of him, so he was like a walking fortress. Goliath wasn't just big. He was a tough warrior too. Every day he'd come out and challenge the Israelite army. He'd shout at them, asking why they were even there to fight, and he made them a deal. If anyone from the Israelites could beat him in a fight, then the Philistines would be their servants. But if he won, then the Israelites would have to serve the Philistines. It was a scary bet. For 40 days, no one in the Israelite army dared to step up. They were all too scared because Goliath seemed unbeatable. Even their king, Saul, stayed in his tent, too afraid to face him. But then, here comes David, a young shepherd boy who wasn't even a soldier. He had courage and faith in God, though. When he heard Goliath's challenge, he didn't hesitate. With just a slingshot and a few stones, he stepped forward to fight the giant. Everyone thought he was crazy, but David didn't back down. He aimed his slingshot, took a shot, and hit Goliath right in the forehead. The giant fell down, and David ran up, took Goliath's sword, and finished the job. It was incredible. David showed everyone that even the scariest challenges can be overcome with bravery and believing in yourself. His story is still told today to remind us that no matter how big our problems seem, we can find a way to face them with courage and faith. Let's make this story exciting and easy to understand. Like we're chatting. So there's this guy named David. He wasn't a soldier. He was just a shepherd boy who took care of his dad's sheep. But one day, he heard about this giant named Goliath who was making fun of the Israelite army and their God. Goliath was like a big bully, and nobody in the army dared to stand up to him. But David was different. He believed in God with all his heart, and he wasn't afraid of Goliath. He went to the king Saul and said, "Let me fight him. I've taken on lions and bears to protect my father's sheep. I know God will help me beat this giant." At first, King Saul thought David was too young and small for such a big job. But David was so determined and full of faith that Saul finally said yes. So David went out to face Goliath. The giant was furious to see a kid coming to fight him. Goliath had all this heavy armor and a huge sword, but David just had his sling and some stones. He knew he didn't need fancy weapons. He trusted in God's strength. When the big moment came, David swung his sling and bam! He hit Goliath right in the forehead with a stone. The giant fell down, and David ran up and used Goliath's own sword to finish him off. It was incredible. With Goliath defeated, the Philistines got scared and ran away. David showed everyone that with faith and courage, even a young shepherd boy can do amazing things. It's a story about standing up to bullies and trusting in God's power to help you through any challenge. Let's dive into what happened after David's big victory. After David defeated Goliath with his slingshot and took down the big bully, the whole Israelite army got a burst of courage. They chased after the scared Philistines and won the battle. It was a huge victory for them because everyone thought Goliath was unbeatable. Now, here's something surprising. Goliath wasn't the only giant around. He actually had brothers who were just as big and strong as him. Can you imagine a whole family of giants? According to the Bible, Goliath had 4 brothers who were all giants like him. There's a bit of a debate about how exactly they were related, but we know they were all family. They were known as mighty warriors, just like Goliath. Later on, David and his mighty men faced off against these giant brothers in more battles. They fought hard, and eventually, they defeated all of Goliath's family. You can read about it in the Bible in 2 Samuel chapter 21 and 1 Chronicles chapter 20. So, David didn't just defeat Goliath. He and his friends took on the whole giant family and won. It's an amazing part of the story that shows how brave and strong David was. With God's help, of course. Alright, let's make this story lively and easy to understand. After David defeated Goliath, there were more big battles to come. In the Bible, it says that Goliath had brothers who were also giants. Can you believe it? These guys were huge, with fingers and toes that added up to 24 altogether. 6 on each hand and 6 on each foot. One day, there was another war with the Philistines, and David's nephew, Jonathan, who was also a brave warrior, took on one of these giants. His name was Lami, and he was Goliath's actual brother. Lami was big and tough just like Goliath, with a spear that was as thick as a big tree branch. In another battle, there was this guy from Gath where Goliath and his family were from. He was super tall too, like a walking skyscraper. But David and his friends didn't back down. They fought hard and defeated all these giants, including Goliath's brothers. It was tough, but David and his friends showed incredible bravery. They won these battles with God's help, just like David did with Goliath. You can read all about it in the Bible in books like 1 Chronicles chapter 20 and 2 Samuel chapter 21. Let's make this exciting and easy to understand. After David defeated Goliath, there were more battles to fight. The Philistines kept coming back to fight the Israelites. In one of those battles, David started to feel tired. But then, there was this giant guy named Ishbi-benob, who was one of Goliath's relatives. He had a huge spear that weighed as much as 7 big bags of flour. Ishbi-benob thought he could beat David with his new sword, but David's nephew, Abishai, stepped in and saved him. Abishai swung his sword and killed the giant. After that, David's men were really worried about him. They said, "You can't go into battle anymore. We need you to stay safe because you're like a bright light for Israel." They didn't want anything bad to happen to David. Later on, more battles happened, and it turned out that Goliath had brothers who fought against David too. These giants were angry and wanted revenge for what happened to Goliath. But with God's help and bravery, David and his men kept fighting and winning. It was tough, but they never gave up. They showed that with courage and faith, even the biggest challenges can be overcome. You can read all about these amazing battles in the Bible, where it talks about David's incredible adventures. Sure, let's make this story come alive for kids. So, after David defeated Goliath, there were more big battles to come. Goliath had some tough brothers who wanted revenge. One of them was Ishbi-benob. He was a giant just like Goliath, and he tried to fight David too. But David's nephew Abishai came to the rescue and defeated Ishbi-benob with his sword. It was a tough fight, but they won. Then, there was another giant named Saph. He was also related to Goliath. In another battle, a brave warrior named Sibbecai took him down. Saph was big and strong, but Sibbecai was even stronger. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. There was a giant in Gath, where Goliath and his family were from, who was super tall and had a really unique feature. He had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. Can you imagine that? He was huge and had extra fingers and toes. This giant challenged Israel, but Jonathan, who was David's brother, defeated him. Jonathan was brave and didn't back down, even against someone as big as this giant with 6 fingers and toes. In the end, David and his warriors defeated all of Goliath's family who tried to fight them. They showed incredible courage and strength, just like David did when he faced Goliath. It's a story about bravery and trusting in God's help to overcome even the biggest challenges. You can read about these amazing battles in the Bible, where it talks about David's incredible adventures. Let's explore this in a way that's easy to understand. So, after David defeated Goliath, there were more giants around who were related to him. One of them had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. Can you imagine? Now, some people wonder if Goliath and his brothers were Nephilim. Nephilim are mentioned in the Bible as giants, but there's a debate about whether Goliath and his family were really Nephilim. The Bible doesn't say they were, though. Instead, it tells us they were from a group called the Rephaim. The Philistines, where Goliath's family came from, were descended from a group called the Anakim. Gath, their city, was a stronghold for these giants in ancient times. So, Goliath and his brothers were probably from this group called the Rephaim, not Nephilim. In fact, the Bible tells us specifically that Goliath and his brothers were from Rapha in Gath. So, they were definitely Rephaim, not Nephilim. There were giants in other places too, not just among the Philistines. The Bible talks about them, but it doesn't say they were Nephilim either. For example, in Deuteronomy it mentions giants who lived in other lands. So, Goliath and his family were big and strong, but they weren't Nephilim. They were part of a group called the Rephaim, and they were known for their size and strength. It's all part of the amazing stories in the Bible about brave heroes and big challenges. Let's make this engaging and easy to understand. After David defeated Goliath and his giant family, people started talking about other big guys in the Bible. One of them was this guy named Og. He was the king of Bashan, and he was huge. His bed was made of iron, and it was super big. 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide. That's like a bed for a giant. Now, some people wondered if Og and giants like him were Nephilim. Nephilim were giants in ancient times, but the Bible doesn't say Og or Goliath were Nephilim. They were called Rephaim, which were another group of big, strong people. Og and his kind were so big and strong that people back then might have thought of them like modern-day giants. But today, there aren't any giants like that on Earth anymore. David and his friends were brave to fight them. So, Og and Goliath were really big and powerful, but they weren't Nephilim. They were just known for their huge size and strength, which made them famous in ancient times. It's all part of the incredible stories in the Bible about heroes facing big challenges.